Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today on Thursday for the third in the 6th series special online event, Consider It Done, brought to you by IPM. We're really excited about today's event because of our special speaker from EMC, Chuck Hollis, but also that we'll be live streaming not only the presentation, but Chuck himself, brought right to your desk. A couple of things. My name's Tim Freeston. I'll be moderating. There are some logistics you should know. In the online portal that you're viewing right now on the left, you'll notice a chat module. Please use that to pose questions to Chuck. Chuck can't see them. We'll save them till the end, and I'll go ahead and lob those over the fence to him. But we will be saving them to the end. Also use it to chat amongst yourselves. We've seen that in the past, and it can spur some other conversations and questions as well. Also to the right, you'll notice that there is a appointment scheduling feature. Please be sure to use this to schedule some times after this particular live video event that you can talk with IPM and EMC about your particular needs and infrastructure. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mike Mocknell, who's the Storage Business Practice Manager at IPM, and he'll tell you a little bit about IPM, and then he'll go ahead and introduce our special guest for today. So with that, Mike.
How you doing, Tim? Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So as Tim said, my name is Mike Mocknell, and I am the Storage Practice Manager for IPM. IPM is a 27-year-old systems consulting company in New York City. And we really focus on all things virtualization, whether it's virtualizing your desktops, virtualizing your server infrastructure, or virtualizing your storage. And we're very excited to have a member of EMC senior executive team to come share with us kind of his, thought leadership vision of what's going on with EMC's clients today and how IPM is also helping our clients on this transformational journey. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Chuck Hollis.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having us today.
Thanks so much for coming.
It's a pleasure. Great, and we'll be back together. We'll be sharing some questions. All right.
In about a half an hour.
Half an hour, oh boy.
Thanks, Chuck.
Hi, everybody. Chuck Hollis. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to IPM, I have the opportunity now to share with you just a handful of thoughts that are going through our kind of collective heads as we finish up 2011 and go forward. While I'd like to talk about everything that we're working on, I just want to give you a few tidbits of some of the big ideas that are changing the way that we see our customers being successful out there. So let's get started. I always like to draw the big picture. And if you're a student of economics like me, you notice there's a shift going on from a physical economy to an information economy. More and more businesses are investing in lots of information in, smart people wrapped around, information product out. Now, for those of you in IT, this is either going to be a challenge or an opportunity, but we do know there's going to be more opportunity going forward around information-centric models. Keep that thought in mind as we go forward. Some of my favorite statistics I like to share with people. Some of you might know we do this annual study with IDC around the digital universe, and there's some great numbers here to share with your management, especially at budget time. One interesting tidbit, for every gigabyte of information you own today, expect 50 times as much by the end of the decade. For those of you who are doing a lot of virtualization, the original idea might be less servers. Unfortunately now, servers once virtualized are a lot easier to consume. So we're predicting 10 times as many physical and virtual servers by the end of the decade. For those of you who decided on a career in IT, good news and bad news, we're only expecting 50% more IT employees by the end of the decade, which means good news, you'll be very popular. Bad news, you probably have no time to enjoy it. And kind of an interesting macro view here on the other side. The chart here shows the declining cost to acquire, store, and deliver a gigabyte of storage over the last 10 years, from around $16 to around 66 cents. Look at the blue line. More and more money is being spent aggregate on information technology, the cheaper we make it. So although we can lower the unit costs of IT, something is very clear, more and more is happening. Consider this as a forcing function for cloud in some ways. So if you're in IT leadership, you've got a lot on your mind these days. One is our friend the cloud. How do I build IT differently, consume IT differently, and operate it as a service? Big challenge. I'm thinking about a whole new generation of knowledge workers that are demanding good mobile experiences as opposed to simple desktop experiences. We're going from business analytics to big data. What does that mean for the IT function as we try to support people in new ways? And of course, if you've been following the news, you know there's new attackers upon us who are after all this information wealth using low and slow techniques we call APT. not your father's IT. A lot of change is upon us. Perhaps the biggest change that's going on is the new relationship between IT and the business. For the first time, we're meeting more and more IT organizations that realize they have to compete for the business. I, as a business user, I want to shop my business around. Maybe I give it to internal IT, maybe I give it to somebody else, but that need to learn to compete for the business is changing the way IT is organized in many of the roles and skills, as we'll see here in a second. So let's start with ground zero, the cloud. This is the big one. And just like we all had internet fatigue in 1995, 1996, I think everybody has cloud fatigue by now. But in a nutshell, this is the big one. We're talking about IT that's built differently, variable pools of shared services, operated differently, delivered as a service, and consumed differently. Very easy to consume for either you or your customers. If it's built differently, operated differently, and consumed differently, we call it a cloud. Now, our view of the industry is that we're going to have three kinds of clouds out there. One is the very familiar and widely known Uber clouds, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. They're out there, they have their customers, but most enterprise IT people say, you know, I don't feel I can control this. This is really not for me. But we know they're going to be out there. A little closer to home, verticalized stacks, all from single vendors. Get everything, one business card, IBM, HP, Oracle, and more lately Dell. We're pursuing a different course with Intel, VMware, and Cisco around virtualization. The idea is to liquefy computing resources and have your choice of operating system, your choice of database, your choice of applications and user experiences. And I think sooner or later, most IT organizations will be adopting one of these models going forward. If you look a little deeper on how us and our partners are thinking about hybrid clouds, there's a lot of rich discussions here. We won't be able to cover them all today. One is, how do we transform enterprise IT organizations to look more like competitive service providers, lowering costs, increasing agility. Another discussion around how we're investing in external service providers to create compatible consumption alternatives to give you some new options. A very rich discussion about how do we encapsulate and move messy legacy application environments to private clouds, be they internal or external. If you're fortunate enough to be building new applications, what do those environments look like? Spring Source, Cloud Foundry, environments that are born cloud ready. And then how do we point this at these new mobilized users that demand very rich, finger-friendly experiences and enough content cached so they don't always need a 4G network to get their work done. So again, no matter where you are in the technology spectrum, things are changing. If you spent any time with EMC, you realize we use our own EMC IT organization as an example how a very large IT organization transforms itself to a private cloud model. We've been at this for a while. We're approximately 80-odd% virtualized. The vast majority of our mission-critical applications now run in virtualized environments. And a lot of the lessons that we're learning on this journey, we're encapsulating, correlating with those of our other progressive customers, and taking back to you. And I want to share some of those highlights as we go through this. One thing that shows up at the board level, and I think this is interesting for most people in IT leadership, is the correlation between agility and IT spending patterns. Just to be very clear, we have been tracking our average time. How long does it take to provision an average application environment? When we started, it was 90 days. Today, it's a day or less. Over the same period of time, we've been able to progressively increase the proportion of IT spend on the new cool stuff, the new capabilities that the business wants, and far less on just keeping the lights on. We see the same pattern over and over again. The more we can spend on creating new capabilities, the happier the business is, because ultimately, that's what business people want out of IT. A very interesting and controversial discussion emerges when you look at how organizational structures change during this journey. I've got up here a simplified graphic of how our infrastructure organization looked in 2008. And I don't want to really call them silos. Perhaps cylinders of excellence would do well. But we had the typical Unix guys, Linux guys, Windows guys, virtualization guys who all fought, block heads, file heads, backup heads in the storage arena, network guys, et cetera, et cetera. These organizational models meant that we were primarily internally delivering technology to our internal users rather than attractive, easy-to-consume services. A few years ago, we had new leadership within EMC IT realize that they had to compete for the business, and now our internal model looks quite different. It's all about IT service management. What are the services people want to consume? How are they delivered? How are they priced? How are they governed? 4 rough buckets: infrastructure, platform, applications, and user experience. and then the shared platforms and technology disciplines behind it. I should point out that the vast majority of services that IT delivers tends to be consumed by other IT groups. Now you notice on the side some of the implications. We're talking new roles, new skills, new compensation models. Cloud is changing how IT is done in the enterprise and creating a lot of opportunities for people who are ahead of the wave. Well, since we're talking about storage today, I thought I'd just spend a few minutes and share how we see storage changing. And storage is kind of central to this discussion for a number of reasons. First of all, it's the one line item everybody sees in the budget, says, what's going on. But the underlying technologies and consumption models are moving quite fast indeed. I'll give you an example. If you talked to us a few years ago, we would build our storage out of RISC processors. It would all be about the disks. And of course, everybody was wondering about how do they manage tape effectively. Flash forward to today, all storage arrays are built on x86. The primary technology everybody's trying to move to is flash. And of course, tape is giving way to disk. Now, if you circle back to the use of x86, that actually creates two benefits. One is the obvious price performance, because we're pulling from the server pool. But also, we now, as you'll see, have some interesting affinity things we can do with server technology, where the lines between storage and the lines between server are starting to progressively blend over time. Interesting times indeed. When I talk to customers, I always want to make sure we talk about the context as well. The context in which these storage technologies operate has changed dramatically over the last few years. If you talked to us before, it was about being isolated as a discipline. Storage guys off doing their own thing. Now storage is integrated with virtualization, operations, data protection. Very hard to imagine an IT discipline where storage isn't integrated. Storage used to be very manual. Now it's fully automated. Years ago, if you needed more storage or more performance, we would go scale up. Now we're going scale out. Data is moving around. It used to want to live in one place. Now it moves from place to place within the data center and often across data centers. And again, we're moving away from an implementation model that's less about being rigid and more about being agile. So let me just share with you, even though we have a lot of storage technologies at EMC, it's very helpful to look at the design points we're thinking in terms of. One very popular one is this notion of unified storage. Dual controller technology built on industry standard parts that basically does it all. Basically can do block, file, object, replication, you name it, one box to do it all. But some people need more. If you need more in the block category, we offer your scale-out block storage. That would be our Symmetrix VMAX. And more customers are finding needs for scale-out file and scale-out object, which would be Isilon and Atmos in our portfolio as well. Now, of course, data has to be protected. And again, as we move from tape to deduplicated disk, that would be Avamar and data domain going forward. So a little bit about VNX. Previously, we had two platforms here, the Clara and the Solera, merged and re-architected the technologies around a single unified platform known as VNX. It's kind of interesting because it brings all of the technologies we talked about previously to light. Latest Intel technology, use of flash both as a cache and as a storage target, deduplication for second-tier data. Perhaps the most innovative thing about the VNX, once you get past the integration of the performance, is its new user interface. We've done as much as possible to make it as easy to use, easy to deploy, and easy to integrate upwards as humanly possible. We also took those same technologies and created an entirely new use case around the VNXE. We were finding more and more people needed enterprise-class capabilities, but without enterprise-class investments. They didn't have time for big storage training. They didn't have the money for large storage expenses. VNXE has been very popular for people who have enterprise-class requirements, but an IT generalist is the one who has to make it work. So again, if you haven't checked out the VNXE for your environment, it's an interesting preview of where easy-to-consume storage technologies are going. I want to just say a little bit about what's happening in the backup and recovery space. We're going from tape libraries to disk libraries, data domain and Avamar are leading the way. As we work with our customers, there's usually a clear and obvious business case to re-architect and re-engineer data protection around the new ways of doing things in data deduplication. I did want to spend just a few seconds on how we see this new storage management model. In some ways, storage is becoming less about the technology and more about the way you use it. And storage as a service is now becoming incredibly popular. Storage administrators are realizing they have to define service catalogs, manage service delivery, aggregate consumption in ways that they haven't had to do before. And again, we have the tools to help them do it. But the big idea here is moving the control point upwards in the stack. For example, if you're a VMware administrator, you'd like access to as many storage capabilities as possible. If you're using some of the newer styles of converged infrastructure like VCE, vBlocks, that's where you want to manage storage. So again, exposing those capabilities at the infrastructure layer. If you run large applications like Exchange, SharePoint, Oracle, SAP, we want to expose even more capabilities upwards to those administrators so they can do what they need. And perhaps in the last 6 to 9 months, we've found it's been very popular to start exposing storage services directly to users who might need it for their own analytics or content requirements. Again, the big idea here is changing storage from a technology to a service and exposing those capabilities upwards where people can use them and consume them conveniently. I want to give you a little preview of how Flash is changing how we think about servers and storage. If you're familiar with some of the stuff we've been talking around Project Lightning, 2 very powerful ideas here. As we see Flash showing up in the server, the interesting opportunity is, can we take small amounts of information, get them really close to the server automatically, and dramatically increase performance? So if you're in a transaction-heavy environment, Project Lightning gives you the ability to use a little bit amount of Flash in the server to get dramatic performance improvements. As we work with more and more big data environments, the opposite is required. Here's an application, doesn't use a lot of compute. Can we move it or vMotion it into the storage array in such a way that it can run very close to the storage itself? The implication is clear. Over time, how we think about servers and how we think storage and the lines between it tend to blur. Data will either move into the server as needed, or occasionally server workloads will be vMotioned into the array. Again, very exciting stuff going forward. So I mentioned big data, but I did want to talk a little bit about what I meant. If you spend any time with EMC, you've realized that we firmly believe that big data is one of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities for IT professionals to create new value in the business. The big data mindset is very different. This is not your father's data warehouse, your father's weekly reports. These are trained professionals who aggregate as much data as possible from as many sources, rapidly gain insights from it, and push it as quickly to the business. Lather, rinse, repeat. They always are looking for more data, processing fast, new tools. This is not a traditional static IT capability. The thing to look for in your organization is a new actor, a data scientist, often called an analyst or a quant. These are people with 3 sets of skills. Very good on the maths and the statistics and the analytics, very good at social sciences, understanding the domain context, and very good at visualizing and explaining what they've discovered. We took the first industry step in May, and we had the first ever Data Scientist Summit, bringing together 300 people from around the world to talk about this new profession. We want to be very locked into their needs because the technology has to serve the work they do. It doesn't matter what industry, what vertical you're in, healthcare, insurance, financials, retail. We see the opportunity for data science to transform how that business gets done. We've made our first efforts at integrating a stack around these data scientists with some predictable and new components. Of course, storage, you'd expect that, but also new kinds of tools to support analytics. Our Greenplum database environment for scale-out transactional data, and newer versions of commercialized Hadoop to support the unstructured data that's so prevalent from the social feeds out there. On top of that, we see an opportunity for new collaboration and workflow tools to take that statistical insight that the data scientists have created and use it to dynamically create new business processes that are far more predictive than we've ever seen in the past. Very exciting times indeed as we start unlocking the potential of all the data that's around us. I wanted to finish up with a couple thoughts about how all these changes are impacting IT leadership. It's kind of funny, you know, the way that you got good in IT for so many decades is never take any risks. The thing that gets you in trouble going forward is refusal to take risks. So we're in times of very, very fast changes. So I want to just share a few thoughts that I've learned about how to kind of think about going forward. The first is getting the mindset right. The big aha that most IT leaders are getting to is that for the first time they no longer have a monopoly. Business users have choice. And there's only so much saying no you can do through procurement or nasty memos or setting mandates. People will go where they can get the best service, and if that isn't your organization, that is not a good thing. And I find it very hard to work with IT organizations that have lost control or become less relevant or have had massive leadership changes simply because they haven't been able to structure themselves to compete for the business. My major theme in 2012 is working with my customers to organize for success in such a way that they can compete against the vast array of external services that are now coming to market. And I think the measurement has changed as well. Everybody's interested in saving costs, and everybody's interested in better services. But what people really crave from IT is this notion of agility, getting what I need very quickly and being able to change my mind. If we can build our IT organizations to be agile, they have the capability of competing against these external service providers. I mentioned before that we were well on our journey to transforming our own IT organization to compete for this internal business like a service provider. The recipe turns out to be three major pillars. One is a new business model for IT. I'll give you a preview of that. Of course, enabling technology, as you might expect, but the most massive investment is in the people itself. New skills, new roles, new DNA, learning how to compete around delivering services, around hugging our technology specialties as we've done for so much of our career. I know this is a busy chart, but it shows you kind of the structure of an overall strategy to achieve IT as a service. The first element is a go-to-market element, typically missing in enterprise IT, always found in a competitive service provider. A group that actually designs and implements new services that people want to consume, service management and delivery, a robust finance function, the ability to create trust in the services that are being consumed, a program to increase skills, and of course, the cloud technologies that all this rests on. Here's just a quick sampling of some of the services that we deliver internally to our own IT users, lab services, infrastructure services, platform services. We internally are learning to compete for the business that our business users might otherwise go out for. If I focus on the people side for just a second, there seems to be three parts to the recipe for this all-important people issue. One is talking openly about what cloud means. The world is changing, IT is changing, our approach to IT is changing, and there are great opportunities if you're willing to change as well. We've been having this discussion. We think it will continue in the future. We're creating new collaboration models around emergent skills rather than traditional disciplines. For example, everyone working on automation sit together. Everyone working on architecture sit together, as opposed to our traditional technology silos. We've also found it's important in our own organization to create new job descriptions, new incentives for people to cross-skill themselves around the new technologies and the new behaviors, rather than just going deeper and deeper into traditional silos. One example of this is a very successful certification that we started offering last year around becoming a cloud architect. Over 4,000 people have been through the coursework, and just now recently we've now augmented that with a kind of an intro course and a more advanced course about transitioning your organization to IT as a service. Again, we think these are the new careers that people will pay a premium for going forward. And we think that even though we're talking about architecture, there are multiple disciplines within IT that are going through a transformation. Client engagement, service creation and management, new ways of building applications, new styles of shared service platforms, technologies, and the support models. We believe that every career, every job description in IT will be reinvented in the next 3 to 5 years. One of the ways that we're supporting that is offering new styles of converged infrastructure. If you talk to EMC, ours will be the VCEV block. If the previous slide was talking about the next generation of pilots, think about this as the new airplanes they're going to need to fly. IT leaders like this approach because they can get on with consuming the technology and creating value from it versus handcrafting it. And whether you're talking to EMC, VMware, Cisco, HP, Dell, anybody, you will see more and more of these converged infrastructure offerings as the market starts moving up the value chain. So final note, where would you start? If you're looking at all this and saying, gee, how do I start digesting it? There is one pattern that seems to rise above all. And that's the notion of how do you make progress without having to start over. What I typically see progressive IT organizations doing is creating a new style team separate from the old style team. Give them a new mission, new set of capabilities, and for God's sake, don't make them go to all the meetings that everybody else has to go to. Point them at a net new use case, one where there's no legacy or very little legacy to bring forward, hopefully one that the business doesn't have to bet on. Give them the opportunity to build technology differently, operate it differently, and experiment with consuming it differently. Give them time to mature their processes. Once we had this team established within our own IT organization, it was about 9 to 18 months before the processes became mature that we felt we could put more progressively enterprise-class workloads on the team. And then over time, what you'll find, and we've seen this now not only in our own organization, but hundreds of others, over time, more and more IT gets done the new way, and less IT gets done the old way. But the trick here is finding a place to start. The three ones that always rise to the top of mind in my customer discussions are application dev and test, Anybody doing serious application development is a big user of variable infrastructure. If you've got the analytics thing going on, hundreds of little relational databases that people are playing with, consider a self-service analytics environment for business reporting. And far away, the number one is virtual desktops. The reason virtual desktops that people want to try these things is that typically there's no legacy to bring forward. There's no servers, storage, or even a lot of legacy workflows that need to be brought forward. It's a greenfield environment where you can experiment with next generation approaches and use that as a design pattern for other parts of IT. Again, virtual desktops done well become the lighthouse for future implementation models. So if I were to wrap it all up, I think that we're in an enormous opportunity here where cloud changes IT and big data changes what business can do. If you're a career IT professional like me, these are very exciting times indeed. I think the challenge we all face is to realize how fast things are changing and invest in the new skills as opposed to the ones for the last 15 to 20 years. If you were interested in anything at all that I had to say, or even if you're just being polite, I'd invite you to go see my blog, chucksblog.emc.com. We write about all this stuff, vibrant discussions. Again, this is the best way that can bring our best thinking to use so we can both engage. And with that, I think we're going to talk about some questions here.
Yeah, Chuck,
great.
Thanks so much. That was
great.
Certainly interesting conversations that we're having with our clients today.
Yep.
I took the opportunity on my new device to...
Your mobile knowledge worker device.
You might leave the knowledge part out, but so...
You need to turn your mic on.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
Sorry.
Rewind.
I got questions for you, all right?
Okay.
So,
hopefully we got answers.
So the one really interesting thing I kept hearing you saying is IT as a service, IT as a service,
Yeah.
IT as a service. For my 15 years in this business, IT's been building infrastructure, putting applications on it, and business has been using it.
Right.
What's the difference?
I think the difference is a service that's easy for IT to create versus one that's easy to consume. My favorite example is iPads at EMC. When they first came into the environment, you had to know the network guy, you had to know the security guy, you had to know the email guy. We'd leave breadcrumbs around for our brethren, and after 4 or 5 days, you get your iPad working, sorta. That's changed. We now have iPad as a service. Click here, IT will provision you with everything you need to have a positive iPad experience. Are the technology elements any different? No, but they've been packaged in a way that they're very easy to consume. When I hear IT as service, it's less about what IT wants to do and more about what their internal customers want to consume.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. And then something that's kind of near and dear to IPM's heart. Our clients that are on know what we do already, but we're kind of known as the VDI guys.
I think it's a good place to be.
We think so as well.
Yeah.
Can you touch on once again why VDI is a great place to start with this new IT service model?
For me, the VDI project just upends every bit of traditional thinking. Is it about saving money on PCs or empowering people in new ways? Well, your first ROI is about saving money on 5-year-old PCs, and you kind of realize this is about provisioning services to people who want to use them. Oh, that's cool. Typically, when you're kind of going from one style or another, you have to worry about the legacy. There's not a lot of legacy here to worry about in terms of shared infrastructure so you can build new. You won't be successful at VDI, as we both know, unless you build the operational processes behind it. Those same operational processes are essentially delivering a service. And those design patterns, those skills, the tools you use look very similar as if you were doing SAP as a service or Exchanges or anything else as a service. So I get very pleased when somebody does a very good job at a VDI project, typically with a partner like you, and says, wow, that template really worked. Where else can we use this new way of delivering IT services in our business? Very cool stuff indeed.
Yeah, and that's where we're seeing the converged infrastructure working a lot in the VDI
yeah,
space.
To me, that converged infrastructure is just getting to good sooner. Why would you burden yourself with handcrafting IT when all you want to do is use IT? And I know that's hard for a lot of IT traditionalists because they built their whole career around handcrafting the components and making them all work. But I think people would rather drive the car than build the car.
100%.
Yep.
One other thing, I think we have a couple of questions, but I had one other thing that I noted. You were speaking about IT as a service, and then kind of segued right into storage.
Yeah, so what's the connection?
Why start there?
I like the storage discussion because it tends to be ground zero when people are feeling pain. It's expensive. It can be hard to manage if you don't organize yourself correctly. It's more like a forcing function to change. I can name dozens of customers where there's been a little bit of a storage crisis where they've said, you know, it really isn't the technology, it's how we're organized to do it. And we take them through creating a service catalog and showing cost to serve and exposing capabilities up. And once the storage team kind of gets their act together, it's amazing how the other layers of IT say, well, that was a pretty cool thing they did. We can do that too. I'm happiest when I see the storage leadership team taking action to say, hey, there's a better way of doing things, we'll show you how, as opposed to being at the receiving end of all the troubles in IT, which is too often. So, where there's great where there's great controversy, there's also great opportunity.
Always.
That's what I think about storage.
Did you, Tim, were there questions from the audience?
Yeah, so what have we heard from the great interwebs here?
Yeah, it looks like we do have a couple of questions. And actually, this is just a reminder to go ahead and post those now in that, that chat module you'll see right in front of you to the left. So the first question is from Parker, and you may have touched on this a little bit. But
Hi, Parker.
He'd like you to expand on the expense of Flash and our costs coming down, just a little more around Flash.
Yeah, anytime a new technology is introduced, it starts very expensive and then declines very quickly over time. Flash is not mechanical, it's silicon, so it's on the DRAM price curve, it's on the processor price curve. We internally have charts showing like a double diamond ski slope between the cost of this technology introduced and how fast it's come down, and there's no belief that it's going to stop anytime soon, just like the other silicon technologies. So that's kind of point one. Point two is that the metrics change. Rather than cost for capacity, as we're all trained to kind of think about, it's cost for performance. And I've been the proud deliverer of before and after comparisons to customers that says, well, you can do it the old-fashioned way, it's going to cost you $1 bazillion, but if you did a little bit of Flash, look at all the money you could save. And the third thing is that, and this is kind of an EMC specific thing, we've invested a lot in smart software, fast VP and that sort of thing, that lets us take a little bit of Flash that uses the hot data and everything else runs on cold SATA storage. Typically in a VMAX environment, 3 to 5% of Flash makes all the difference. It's now running near native Flash speeds. So we're all supposed to be IT professionals, keep current with what's coming along. You really owe it to yourself to take a look at what Flash can do in your environment. A little Flash goes a long way. I don't know, are you seeing anything different, similar in your world?
We're seeing the exact same thing. The 80 to 90% drop in price in the last year and a half, and just a massive rapid.
I can tell you, my last MacBook Air was a Flash-based one. I ain't going back. I ain't going back.
A little bit of Flash goes a long way.
A little bit of Flash goes a long way in my life.
Exactly. I've been there.
All right, a couple more questions. I have a question from Steve. Are enterprises using external or mostly private clouds? Where's the storage?
I think it changes. As you go to smaller businesses, a lot of them want to use as little internal IT as possible. I'm talking very small businesses. The commercial, mid-market, I think most of the effort, and I'd be interested in your opinion, is around transforming themselves and becoming more competitive and looking like a service provider rather than just giving stuff outside.
100%. I mean, we're seeing little bits. I know internally at IPM we use a lot of cloud providers because we're not in the IT. We're not in our own IT
heavy
business.
Consumers of IT as a part of your business.
We have Salesforce. We use Microsoft Office 365. But my clients are not going there yet.
But let's say you're at decent scale in your IT organization. Look at it. What does a service provider have that you don't? Well, they got access to the same technology at roughly the same cost and roughly the same labor pool that everybody
They have agility today.
They have agility. I think the difference is they're organized differently. So the people I talk to are more interested in making the investment around organizing to look like a service provider rather than handing it off. And you double click on that, there's some usual security and governance and stuff. But again, I think the larger you are, the less likely you are to use external services today.
And a lot of what I hear is security around it today. People just aren't comfortable with that.
Okay, great. We have a question from Paris. Paras. How does price compare to Fusion IO?
I could compare it. I don't know, but Fusion IO is kind of different. There's a number of technologies out there that are server technologies where Flash goes in, but there's no ability to get data in and out, and that's something you want to do because when data comes in, it needs to go out, get close and moved in, and when it needs to be protected, replicated, backed up, it needs to move out. So I would assume that the hardware costs are relatively the same. I think what you'll see going forward from EMC is the software that moves data in and out of that environment intelligently rather than raw hardware costs. So at the end of the day, it's all just parts.
Okay, question from Ben. What do we need to know about big data Can you expand on this a bit?
I think you have to take a look at the business you're in and ask yourself how much analytics are in use today in the business and what the next 2 to 3 years will look like. I met one customer that was complaining because they had 3,212 or something like that SQL Server images running around their environment. Now you can see that as a problem or an indicator that someone's got a big analytics habit going on.
Right.
So, I think, the two discussions that comes up is how do I control that? But I think the more interesting discussion is how do I enable that? If the business wants to create more value from hammering data together in a variety of places, IT should not be in charge of rationing that. So I would say prepare, look at analytics consumption in your own business. And if it's on the upswing, prepare to do new styles of IT with new support functions to make these guys more successful. I don't know.
And how is EMC addressing that? I mean, I was just with a reinsurance company, and not the biggest company in the world, and they shared that they have 2,100 SQL instances.
They're analytics
running.
junkies, right?
Exactly.
They're analytics junkies.
Right.
So would you rather have everybody going off and doing their own thing, or would you like to put up a self-service analytics environment where people could mash together data in a controlled, powerful, somewhat managed type of function to enable that consumption? For me, this is another example. What is the job of IT? To keep people from using it, or help them use more of it.
Right.
And when somebody goes through one of these IT as a service transformations, they realize their job is to make people use it. Let the finance guys figure out how to control expenses.
Right.
That's not what IT people have to do.
100%.
So, I think you're going to see more of those going forward. Yeah.
Great question from Bill. What do you see the role of the CIO in the future? How quickly is this changing?
I see a lot of new CIOs, for starters. The classic movie in me is, well, we've got some new IT leadership. Really, where'd they come from? They came from the business. And I think you're seeing a lot of that because the business is depending on IT. They want IT to sort of run like part of the business rather than the IT guys. The CIO that I going forward, the best CIOs that I see going forward are either working on transformational change in their organization or trying to figure out, if they've been successful with that, what are the new capabilities that the business wants. Mobilize knowledge workers, creating big data capabilities around analytics, creating content platforms that engage people and keep them sticky. I don't see enough of it, but I'm seeing more of it over time.
The conversations are happening.
Yeah,
right?
the conversations are happening.
And it gets back to that whole internal IT is now competing with external forces for that share of the business's money.
Now, that being said, there are some wonderfully progressive CIOs and IT leaders I meet out there who are doing some amazing things. I just want to meet more of them.
Right. Or enable more of them, right?
Yeah. Okay, looks like we got a last question here, and then you can go ahead and wrap up, Mike. How are enterprises able to use existing storage to achieve the goals you've outlined?
Well, there's a kind of recycle thing. I always thought it'd be cool if I bought a bunch of old cars, put them in the garage, I could kind of Ferrariize them and get a Ferrari out of the front end. It's a little bit of work, I'm sure. But the reality of it is people are often burdened by the technology they have on the floor today. And virtualization can help you, storage virtualization, server virtualization, et cetera, but I see it kind of as a stopgap. Those technologies were not designed for this new use case. They can get you close to the model. They can get moving in the right direction. I like to joke 2 or 3 years ago when EMC built its own first internal private cloud. It was with scrap servers nobody wanted and downrev storage that nobody wanted. They got it up, they proved the concept, and the money flowed.
It was like the first virtualization farms people had 5
I know,
years
it's just
ago,
leftovers, look what I can do.
It was IT stuff.
So, it has a role, but I don't think it's a sustainable role. So if that's the stepping stone that gets you to there, technologies from EMC and other vendors will help you repurpose that stuff. But I got to look people in the eye and say, and that'll get you through to next year, or maybe 6 months from now.
Right, when are you going to stop cobbling together and build it right?
Yep.
Excellent. So I think that's all the questions. I think, Tim, you were going to wrap it up for us.
Hey, it's been
Chuck,
great.
I want to say thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
So
I hope we can
glad
do
you
it
could
again
make our
sometime,
time.
okay?
Excellent.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen, for that insight into the storage of the future. That's just one of 6 live streamed events that we've got planned for IPM Consider It Done. 3 down, 3 to go. The next one will be same bat time, same bat channel next week on Thursday. And please come back. And thank you, everyone, for showing up today. We really appreciate it.